Hello, and welcome to, well, an inglorious 6th of July with a difference. You see, when I did the live, I always structured them kind of like I do a seminar. The only difference between a seminar and the way I do a live is, of course, in a seminar, I can see people's faces, as a rule. I'm with them in person. That's about 40 or 50 maximum, sometimes as low as 10 or 12, depending on the group and the year group and the size of the course, and the number of teaching assistants which are PhD students and lecturers assigned to the course who are happy to lead seminars. All these things have a factor in those numbers in that seminar group, and you're able to do it far more in person. You're able to try and do that level of interaction, and I always try and bring to the live a level of direct interaction, a level of direct engagement, because some people learn best by listening, some people learn best by reading, some people learn best by communicating, discussing, and that gets their synapses flying that way, and all their brain working. And some people learn best by doing. There is a spectrum of how you learn, and it isn't universal for someone. Someone might learn some things best by doing, some things best by talking, some things best by listening, and some things best by reading. There are things which I learn better by reading. There are things I learn better by discussing. There are things I learn best by teaching. Yes. The other dirty little secrets that all educators have. We learn by teaching. Some of the history I teach all of you, I might have taught at university a long time ago, but I relearn it again, going over my notes before I before I put in a video, or I do a live, and I learn it again because I am actually a learning by teaching personality on a lot of bits. By having the discussions, because it's by having the discussions and the teaching and the seminars especially that I have to think of, both examine the positions the students take as well as examine my own positions, my own views on something. One of the interesting things about history is that it is a space of both perpetual, we know certain things happen on certain dates, broadly speaking. I would say broadly speaking. There's actually an admiral in this video, in this topic, who we're not quite sure whether he died on the 10th or the 1st of the month. Why? Because he was buried on the 10th, and a lot of the books which have been written since him have taken that as his day of dying. Yet, according to his wife, he died on the 1st and was buried on the 10th. I would say I think his wife is probably right, and his wife's diaries are correct. But the thing is, you also have the fact that when I say that, there are going to be numerous people going, but this eminent historian and this eminent historian and this eminent historian's books have all put him down as dying on the 10th. And you're going, well, yeah. But, who are you going to trust? The historian who's writing about him 300 years later, or his wife, who was the one who buried him? But still, there are fun things with that, because the fact is, on the burial certificate, we can't find a death certificate. There wasn't really one at the time. And we can find the burial certificate, so that's the date we can prove. And it's just got 10th and 10th. So we've now got a conflict between what is theoretically an official record and a person's diary. And who do you go with? I know which I go with. But I'm broadly speaking, in terms of published historians, if we consider YouTube to be a version of publishing yourself as a historian, I'm in the minority. And as a lifelong person who has enjoyed being in the minority sometimes on historical positions until they actually become the majority because I win the argument, that doesn't feel bad. Now, what am I trying to say though? Well, these battles are about leadership. They are. That's what the lessons of these films are. We have sometimes a stylized Hollywood version of a leader in our mind. And one of the things you always have to remember is that an actor is chosen in many ways because they look good on camera, and they have the ability to inhabit a person. And they will do it in a way which is stylized to the camera. You know, it's one of those things is, if you're actually maybe going to kiss someone, you might, you might both be cupping each other's faces. You're not going to do that on camera because that's your two main stars, and if you hide their faces, you're not getting money's worth from the millions you're probably spending on them. And people want to see their faces. So, if there's on such things as kissing, there is style going on and stuff adapted for screen. Imagine how leadership changes. The process of leadership. This is why when you can always tell when you're reading someone who's never actually been involved in any real leadership, or rather, they are not discussing it as a real leadership when they're on social media. When they post pictures like, this person would have led legions. No, they wouldn't have. Because usually they put in someone who is a completely gym Adonis body, looks magnificent. No, I'm sorry, but most of the people who were leading legions were probably slightly portly. They were Roman senators. They'd been around for a long time. They'd already done their military service. And whilst they might occasionally find themselves leading from the front, their main job wasn't to be there doing the fighting and at the front like a macho hero in the movies going, yes, I can direct a battle whilst also fighting 14 different guys with my sword and throwing a spear. Because, believe it or not, no one can actually do that. Nope. The odds are the commander of the Legion is sitting on a hill or a slightly raised point behind the Legion, watching what's going on and giving orders about where the reserves are going and deploying their forces. Shameless book plug. Well, it's kind of like that when you've got a fleet. If you consider, when we're talking about fleets, there's always a dashing hero who will leap from ship to ship. That's very rare and definitely not something you want to do when you're commanding a multi-ship organization. You know, there's the discussion I've had about Philip Vian and the Altmark incident. I was talking about this in Australia. In one of the presentations. Officially, he doesn't go on till after the action, after the boarding's over. There's some interesting discussions and interesting rumours, which I have come across, that he did go aboard earlier than that, but he shouldn't have. He's supposed to be staking back and being in charge. Now, you can argue that, frankly, there isn't much else he can do. And that he's got a jolly good navigation team and a jolly good bridge team to keep the ship in position. There's only one ship involved. He's got no radio communications with home. So he can't tell them what's going on. Not inside the fjord. The only place that there's going to be action is aboard the Altmark, and whilst he probably doesn't want to be in the front rank, because if he gets shot, that's a terrible waste of investment, you can say, well, maybe he does want to get on board rather sharpish, because there's going to be a lot of prisoners to manage, there's going to be a lot of situations, and there might be Norwegians come aboard. So you might want to be able to deal with them. So you can argue, you can sort of understand if he was maybe on there slightly earlier than the official record says. But again, when you start to look for leaders in the military, it's one of the interesting things is when I honestly, if you take people to meet special forces, people who have been in special forces units, consistently, every time it's happened, and usually this has been former members, and someone's been meeting them for the first time, one of the people walking away who met them the first time was going, I thought they'd be bigger, bulkier. No. They're not. Because when you're looking for someone who's a leader, this matters as much as this. I need to keep them in balance. Spend too much time training one, the other's going to get out of whack. I can speak to this myself. I try and do a balanced life, but the moment I get home from a trip away, I've got a good few weeks of work to catch up on. And I don't get to the gym as much as I should do. And I know that. Yes, I've got all these books to read. Got a huge pile of books from Australia to read. I've got a huge pile of books which have arrived while I've been away. I've got assignments to check. I've got all sorts of paperwork to do. And I've got family stuff to catch up on. And it's very easy to lose track of the fact that you want to be healthy in body as well as mind. It's very easy to lose track of that. Good leaders usually have to balance both. And the further you get away from being a small unit leader, i.e. a direct line manager or something like that, the more and more time is going to be spent sat down reading paperwork, trying to use your brain to solve problems rather than your muscle. But the problem is, no matter how much work you put into both, think about it. If you're most developed, you could be physically, you could be really spend a lot of time in training in unarmed combat and all those things. You could still get lulled by a feint, get drawn off, overextend yourself. You have to roll with the punches. And it's the same when we're talking about the Battle of Grenada and the Battle of Algeciras. The first Battle of Algeciras. You have to roll with the punches. Now, in one of these battles, the Admiral actually does order of withdrawal, because that makes sense. Forms the fleet up, gets them out, pulls them back. One of the battles they sort of have to. Whether they want to or not, they don't really get the chance to order it. It happens. And it happens because they made a mistake on the first way coming in. And this is with Grenada. Grenada is an interesting battle because there are so many different wars it could be part of. The fact it's the French and British fighting for control of the Caribbean, to me, means that it's more a part of the Bourbon War, of what I would call it, or the Anglo-French War of 1778-23, than the American Revolutionary War, especially as the highlight of this afterwards, and the highlight in consequence of beginning to, was the Siege of Savannah, which actually failed. It's an ongoing dispute over who controls the Caribbean. Why does that matter? Well, if you're a capitalist, it wouldn't matter. If you're a mercantilist, it does. This is why you always have to be careful when you're listening to someone's economic views. And be very careful, because even some modern political ideologies and modern political groups actually, the economic worldview they are espousing is mercantilism, not capitalism. In fact, one of the most fun things I have with people is that someone was telling me, no, we need to reimagine a world away from capitalism the other day, and they were describing a world, and I went, you're a mercantilist. And I went, wow, what's that? Is that something new you've heard about? I went, no, that's very old. That's what preceded capitalism. It was found to not work that well. Led to a lot of wars. Oh, it wouldn't in my vision of the future. Really? It never does. It never does with anyone. Again, it's a leadership thing. People always imagine they are a better leader than the people who preceded them. They always imagine they're going to be far better at solving problems than the people who preceded them. And you never know, you might be lucky, you might actually be better. But the people in the past weren't dumb. They had less technology than us, but they weren't dumb. As I've been over before, we are where we are because we stand on the shoulders of giants, because of the technology that was developed in the generation before, and the generation before that, and the generation before that. It's all cumulative. It's all knowledge. It's all development of experience and understanding, and how to perceive and approach the world. And you have to be careful when people start to regress back, because it can seem very comforting. One of the things I found fun the other day was I was reading something about the pace of change. Apparently this is disquieting to people. The world's getting too fast. It's changing too fast. I think the problem is not the pace of change. I think it's the pace of adaptation. Because it used to be the world would adapt at its own pace. Every group moving at their own speed. Now with the internet, with the world being as close as it is in information terms, you have to, in a way, try and get the whole world to adapt at the same pace. And some parts of the world are happier to adapt with some things faster than other parts are happy to adapt with them. But those other parts which are slower to adapt in one way will be faster to adapt in another way. It's the joys of the world. We're different. Let's enjoy it. It makes travelling so much more fun than if we were all the same. Trust me. It'd be boring if everywhere you turned up looked exactly the same. So, the run-up to Grenada is a typical story of Anglo-French warfighting. British turn up with large fleet. British take place off French. British then take fleet off to fight off other places. French fleet and British fleet then left in region keep going up and down in terms of relation of strength because of reinforcements arriving and ships heading home. Ships heading home will take home any diseased personnel who have been guarding the Fever Islands and those things. Ships coming in are bringing in fresh supplies. This is then highlighted by Royal Navy going off to escort large convoy home, send convoy home, which includes a lot of frigates of the station's frigates as escorts. At that point, the French actually get reinforcements. British don't realise they've had reinforcements, and French decide to go on offensive because the Royal Navy's off doing something else. And the British come back to try and take everything back in one fell swoop. It's what happens. And again, if you're going to do better, tell me how you would do better. Because 99 times out of 100, when I hear someone tell me they would have done better than John Byron, who's the British Admiral at this point, I sit there and ask them, well, how would you better? Well, I would know the French had... Well, how would you know? He doesn't have satellites. He doesn't have radio communications. He doesn't have anything that we would consider a standard part of naval operations in the modern era. He doesn't have an aircraft carrier. He doesn't have reconnaissance aircraft. He has nothing. He doesn't even have enough frigates. He hasn't even got enough funds to hire local ships to act as brigs for him, which Admiral Samaraz, who's in the next battle, does. So, yeah. He's got the information he's got. Now, you can then turn around and go, well, perhaps he should have behaved more cautiously. You can make a good case for that. But does caution change the battle? No, it probably makes the battle more likely a standoff, rat-a-tat-tat, nothing happened battle. So, yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's better. But whilst it is a French victory, neither side loses a ship in terms of actual ships lost. One of the British ships ended up going to Jamaica, but it's not lost, it just goes to Jamaica. The French lose 173 killed and 773 wounded, and the British lose 183 killed and 346 wounded. I think that the decision is that it's a French victory by 10 deaths. So yeah. John Byron made a mistake. What was his mistake? Well, he found himself facing probably one of the most competent French admirals of the era. And that French admiral had managed to get more ships. And he spotted John Byron coming back to try and retake Grenada. And so what he does is he orders his ships to go to sea as they were ready, in order of speed, rather than forming them up into divisions and going out properly like that, like would be traditionally done. This is a decision. And it's a decision made on the fly. It's a very quick decision. And this means Byron perceives his fleet as being weaker than it is. He thinks, they haven't had any upgrade, they haven't had any reinforcements. Okay, I can take them. And it's 25 ships aligned versus 21. The French have 25, the British have 21. It's not a massive advantage, but it's enough of one. It's enough of one, especially when you consider, because Byron, to try and catch them as they're coming out of harbour, which if he had done would have been a masterstroke, because he could have overwhelmed them and beaten them up as they came out. So as they came out one after the other, he would have been there with them ships. Unfortunately, he wasn't as close as he thought he was. He wasn't able to get there as quickly as he thought he would. And so they were out, and they were in line of battle. And his ships were still in general chase, which meant they were a ragged band. Which brings us back to our Romans from earlier, because what was the real Roman advantage versus barbarians? Were they hulking, farming, muscled sort of constant labourers, who were mobilised for war? Were they loggers? Were they people who constantly did large amounts of manual labour? Well, no. The Roman army for most of its period was quite fit and healthy, but they didn't tend to recruit from the largest, most physically inclined people. No, what they did was they had an ironclad discipline. They did have an ironclad discipline. They had a more uniform approach to their. And when I say uniform, I do not mean it was uniform. I'm saying a more uniform approach. There was far less variety of personal outfitting in the Republican era than most of the armies that it would face, and especially from things like the Celtics, etc., and the Celts and the other groups, and especially in the Legionary era. There was still variety, but there was also a level of homogeneity there. And the whole point was, if you were formed up in a solid line, and people are reaching you one after another, if they're not meeting you in a line, then yeah, you might be a bigger, massive, brawny person, the archetypal Hollywood hero, the person who you see in Vikings, who leaps over the shield wall. Really not a good idea to do, by the way. Really don't try and do it in actual combat if you're ever faced with a shield wall. Don't leap over them. Usually you'll find on the other side there are about 3 or 4 people standing back who will quite happily, while you're dealing with the probably momentary stunning of actually completing the feat of leaping over, will stab you with a spear. And you won't survive. But again, with the shield wall, you reach that wall, that row of soldiers. They don't break line. They don't come and challenge you to single combat. They go, hello. There are 4 of us. One of you. That's how the Romans win quite a large chunk of their battles. They only really start to run into trouble when people start to copy their tactics in terms of organisation. And start to think through, hang on, we've got to deal units. That's one of the reasons why the Carthaginians are quite so difficult to deal with, because they have the same hoplite background, the same Greco background in many ways, in military background, as the Romans. Yes, the Carthaginians were probably the Western Mediterranean branch of the Phoenician Empire, but they have a lot of the Greco-Macedonian, to an extent Egyptian, military heritage in their land warfare makeup. So here's the other thing when we're looking at this battle. And this is the other problem for John Byron, because he has good ships. He has the single most powerful ship of the battle, Princess Royal, 90 guns, second rate. Single most powerful ship of the battle. But the trouble is, the French have 2 80-gun vessels, their own 2 second rates, and their advantage overall is 176 guns. Now, in ship terms, that's 2 fifth rates, well, 2 fourth rates, 50-gun ships, and well, it's more than a third rate, but not quite a second rate, but we'll go for a second rate. Basically, their advantage is free ships. Now, I know I said 25 ships to 21 ships earlier. And there is supposed to be, according to many sources, a 25th shipper line there. I know. I've read the books which say 25. However, I've also read the books which only give you 24 ships of the line as names. So I don't think there is more than 24 there. There is, I think, a 25th ship of the line not far away for the French in terms of strategic terms. I think there is a 25th one. I don't think it's actually at the battle. I think that's why it might be interesting. It might come out because D'Estaing's fleet technically does have 25 ships of the line theoretically attached to it at this point, but they only have 24 present at the battle. So I think that's where the numerical difference might be coming in. And one of the fifth rate, I keep calling the fourth rates fifth rates, because they've got 6th rate frigates. They've got no fifth rate. They've got 6th rates as well. There's no fifth rates actually at the battle, and I keep calling the fourth rates fifth rates. Sorry. One of the fourth rates they've got actually there is actually a privateer, which had been escorting a merchant convoy and had been let's say, I'm going to use the phrase commandeered into the fleet. It's still a viable formation, and the main strength is in the center and the rear. The center and the rear is where they have the main strength. Now, when you sort of look at it, you go, well, that's 9 ships versus 7, so what's the advantage here? Well, if you start matching up, Languedoc takes on Princess Royal. The 474s cancel each other out. The the 64s cancel each other out. So you have the 2 50-gun vessels. Now, what you could do is you could double up those 64s. Send a 50-gun to back up each of the 2 against 64, or you could send one of the 50 guns to back up, 2 50 guns to back up the Languedoc versus the Princess Royal if they match in. Either way, you can cause trouble. You can double up ships. And then if we consider the 8 on the rear, well, the 3 British 74s all have a counterpart. The 4 64s, well, one of them's getting a 74 to fight and line up against, and the other 3 are getting 64s. And then there's a 50 coming around. And if you really want to make life a nightmare for someone, you'd match in a 74 and a 50 versus one of the 64s. And believe it or not, we are not dealing with people who are not capable of doing this. The chef d'escadre, it's a really weird rank. It's basically a version of Senior Captain Commodore. Okay? Jean-Joseph de Rafels, Dobrovs, is not an idiot. He is capable of organising that at his level. And will do. The centre, well, it's Vice Admiral Charles Henry Hector d'Estaing. Yeah, he can do that. Lieutenant General at the front? Yeah. gun advantage. It does help. Does help to have a 16-gun advantage. Sunday Fours will have friends to match up with, but let's see. Fantastique en Provence. They have one which they have a 4-gun superiority of against Medway, and they have one equivalent of Trident. And then they have a 70-gun vessel, which let's be honest, Boyne is just not a good mix. But they even out in numbers. Probably you'd have Boyne matching up against the 74 and one of the 74s matching up against a Tonnant. That would be your only real option. Only real viable option. The battle is as mixed as it sounds. Basically, they're coming back. They charge at Grenada. They are trying to follow General Chase. Fame, Lion, at least 2 other ships, and there's a debate as to which 2, but I have my own ideas on that. And honestly, I have the feeling the other 2, Fame and Lion, I have a feeling the other 2 ships are Grafton and possibly Monmouth, maybe Prince of Wales. Because Barrington was pretty aggressive. They get caught. They don't manage to get back into the line. And so they get caught between the 2 lines. And that's not a scenario you want to be in. Especially not when you're already outnumbered. Lion is actually so caught that she ends up leaving the fleet basically and using a downwind run to Jamaica to avoid the capture. The French lost no ships, the British lost no ships other than Lion going to Jamaica, and yeah. There's actually a debate as to whether or not the French lost more than the British in terms of killed. Because officially it's 173-ish to 183-ish. But the fact is we have some very interesting differential figures for the French. That could mean it could have been they actually lost more. But the British are the ones forced to withdraw. The French keep Grenada. The British withdraw to St. Kitts to repair. D'Estaing goes on to carry out the siege of Savannah, and Byron resigns, basically. He doesn't serve with the Navy in a seagoing role again. He gets sort of promoted to one, but doesn't actually go out to it. So, yeah. His career's over. He decides he failed. He'd already been injured on the way out to the Caribbean. He threw a gamble, and it failed. If it had succeeded, it would have been a great thing, but it failed. And then we have the First Battle of Algeciras. Now, this takes part of the War of the Second Coalition, and I'm quite happy concluding in that, but that's part of the Napoleonic War, Revolutionary War period, where dates and movements are honestly intriguing. And Algeciras is this place. That's nice to land up. Yeah, it's opposite Gibraltar. The French and Spanish are once again trying to mass a fleet. When has this happened before? I can't think. When has this happened before? When have the French and Spanish tried to mass a fleet? Well, in this case it's 1801. And Lenoir, the French, let's call him Admiral in charge at this point. Well, he's basically trying to get his ships to that fleet. He's trying to get them to Cadiz. Now, Cadiz is a good place to form up. Cadiz is a great place to form up. But getting to Cadiz, that's fun. He had originally been posted to Toulon to be second in command to Admiral Ganteaume, who, how do I put this, is, well, he'd been wounded in action at the glorious 1st of June. He would, of course, be wounded in action at the Battle of the Nile, where he was, I think, second in command again. Basically, we are dealing with a load of French admirals who are the ones who survived all the terrors of the revolutionary period. And let's be honest, D'Estaing didn't survive it because he spoke truth to power. He acted with honour. Always a good way to get yourself killed. It's not saying don't do it. Be honourable. But it's better be honourable with a couple of thousand soldiers and sailors behind you with a lot of heavy weapons than to be honourable necessarily on your own, speaking truth to power. If you're not in a sort of a democracy where the rule of law applies. If you're in a scenario like the Terrors, where power, might is right, make sure you have plenty of might. And so he'd been trying to get ships from Toulon to Cadiz. And he found out that a guy called Admiral Saumarez was blockading Cadiz. And he's blockading Cadiz with a fleet which was large enough that he didn't think he could fight it. Linois didn't think he could fight his way into Cadiz. So he goes into Algeciras as a very protected place to put his ships for a bit, because it's opposite Gibraltar, so the Spanish had spent a lot of time fortifying it. And Saumarez hears about this and goes, you think I'm going to wait for you to come and sandwich me with between you and the fleet in Cadiz? You really think that? No, I'm going to charge. And Saumarez is not a bad admiral. Linois is not a bad admiral. They are both competent admirals. Not necessarily Collingwoods, but they're competent admirals. And so there's sort of fleet formations. Now, to add to that, you've also got to add a whole load of Spanish gunboats and Spanish fortifications on the French side. So, oh, and a load of shoals, and the wind keep not cooperating, and the fact you're on the wrong side of the bay as far as the British experience goes. Because the British have a lot of knowledge of operating in the eastern side of the Bay of Gibraltar. They do not have a lot of experience operating on the western side. They don't. It's a shame, really, but they don't. And so here is the battle takes place. And basically the battle is a classic example of, again, the French have formed themselves up into a fairly good defence position with the forts and the various shoals protecting them. And the British tried to use speed and elan to compensate for this. Basically, the idea was get in as quickly as you can and get out with the French ships. It didn't really work that well. In fact, What it succeeded in doing was the more and more Samara's pushed, the more and more his ships got held up in the shoals. This idea had been going fast. Launch boats, storm French ships under the supporting fire of their main ship's guns, and take them. That didn't work. And he actually loses HMS Hannibal as a result. Basically, two of the French ships actually also get run on shoals, but also get stuck. But the thing is, they're stuck on the right side of the bay for them. Hannibal is stuck on the wrong side of the bay for her and gets captured by soldiers and sailors of the French and the Spanish, and almost gets others captured as well when they try and come to pull her off, thanks to a nice little false flag operation, which sometimes is claimed to have been accidental. It just accidentally on purpose worked out for us. She's a powerful tool. Speed and surprise. She is. They are. It is. But it's also a tool which, if you place all your eggs in that basket of, you'd better make sure that basket is pulled off. You know, basket is as tight and works as possible as it can, because if you don't, you're in trouble. And this is the point at which you really do know a good leader, because a good leader at this point takes a step back, looks around and goes, well, cover me in plum sauce and coat me in sugar, because I need to do like a fairy and fly away. But you haven't heard that one before. One of my great aunts saying. I'll repeat that for you. Cover me in plum sauce. Roll me in sugar. Or dust me in sugar if you change that. Call me a fairy because I need to fly away. Basically, sugar plum fairy. If I'd said that to Samara's face, I'd have been killed. He pulls back. He gathers into him the strength that hadn't arrived in time for the battle, for various reasons, due to more intelligent sailors. And he launches another attack, this time at night. He uses the information he gleans from Gibraltar. While he's repairing his ships in Gibraltar. And watching what the French are doing and Spanish are doing to repair their forces. And then does a very effective win. Both times, both admirals chose speed. Both admirals then had to gather their forces back together in. Both admirals then had to work out what to do. They made mistakes. There were losses. People were upset about the losses. Even the Royal Navy doesn't like to lose a third rate. They have a lot of them, but they don't like to lose them. It looks very bad in newspapers. And there's the personnel you lose as well, which is far more annoying than the ship. Yes, the ship takes several hundred years to grow. and build, considering the time it takes to produce the material used for it. But the crew is just as valuable, if not more, a valuable resource. Because the Royal Navy can always nick some more ships off the French. They can't nick more good crew. It doesn't work like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. What have we got coming up? We have... Next week we have... Zero Influence. Teddy Roosevelt's desire for naval diplomacy. Walk softly, carry a big stick. It's going to be interesting. And we have Brew Ships 116 tomorrow evening. And then we'll be announcing the winners of the Patreon vote tomorrow as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. No, this isn't as long as normally they are, but I thought you prefer something slightly more succinct than long-winded on this front. Normally I add in a question. I've been doing a fair number of battles, which are not exactly the more popularly known ones recently. And I've asked people a couple of times, and asked them again. I'll ask it again. Battles you think that are worth studying, which people don't often talk about. Because, in my experience, all battles have something to teach us. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Take care.